Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, the FBI's first couple that they wanted dead or, well, dead. There was no dead or alive, just the dead part, which made it difficult for Bonnie and Clyde to live like normal people, that and their livelihood being robbing and killing folks. We've all seen the Hollywood version of Bonnie and Clyde, and it seemed not so bad. But the real version, our version of Bonnie and Clyde, was a little bit different. I'm Mr. V, and welcome back to the Hidden Lens. Today, we're going where Hollywood wouldn't. We're going to get down and dirty with America's famous outlaw couple and see how they lived from the time they woke up until the time they went to sleep. And no, we're not crawling into bed with this couple, but not for the reason you think. It's because they didn't always sleep in a bed. In fact, not sleeping in a bed was a regular thing to them. The Barrow gang lived in a car, not as a figure of speech. Literally, they lived in a car. Jeff Guinn documents this in his book, Go Down Together. And the real picture he paints is rough. As Bonnie and Clyde's faces spread through every newspaper in the region in 1933 and into 1934, restaurants became dangerous, motels became impossible, and they couldn't check into anywhere without getting recognized and shot at. So the car became everything. The bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, the whole house, on four wheels. And it wasn't just Bonnie and Clyde in there. Some stretches you had up to 5 adults crammed in to a stolen Ford V8. Bonnie, Clyde, W.D. Jones, Buck Barrow, and Buck's wife, Blanche Barrow. 5 people, 1 car, driving through the night, taking turns sleeping, sitting up while somebody else drove. Blanche Barrow wrote in a memoir about all this, and she talks about the bickering. Of course there is bickering. 5 adults, 1 vehicle around the clock for weeks at a time. No privacy, no plumbing, no way to wash. This wasn't a rough night every now and then. This was the routine. So what did dinner look like to the Rowland apartment? Cold beans straight out of the can, bologna sandwiches, sardines pulled out of the tin with their fingers, parked on some back road in the middle of nowhere, passing the can around, then getting back on the highway before anyone spotted them. There was no hot meal waiting for them at the end of the day, no restaurant they could safely sit down in, no kitchen table to gather around. It was whatever they could grab from a store on the way through town without getting recognized. And bathing meant streams and rivers when they could find them, cold water. And as for soap, well, that's a whole nother question. Did they even have soap? Sometimes, maybe, whatever bar of soap they could steal off of a shelf at a roadside store without drawing attention. And it makes you wonder, was it Ivory? Because Ivory soap was the soap that floated. Procter & Gamble had been marketing Ivory as the soap that floats since 1891. So by the 1930s, it was sitting on every general store shelf in America. So you got to imagine this in your head now. Bonnie and Clyde squatting in some cold Texas creek, and a bar of Ivory soap goes floating off downstream, and one of them has to chase it through the water. That's the level of dignity we're working with here. But seriously, there is no schedule to anything. When you're driving hundreds of miles a day, switching directions to throw off law enforcement, a cold creek isn't a planned stop. It's an opportunity that happens to line up with where you are and how safe it feels at the moment. So picture it for a minute, or more like take a whiff of this for a minute. 5 people in the car, weeks at a time, eating from cans, sleeping sitting up, washing in the creek whenever the geography cooperates. That was the baseline. That was a normal week for Bonnie and Clyde. Now think about what the 1967 film shows. Bonnie and Clyde in a clean motel room, fresh sheets, privacy. They got space. There's a lamp on the nightstand. By mid-1933, scenes like that were impossible for the real couple. They were too famous. Their faces were too well known. They couldn't walk into a motel lobby without someone behind the desk reaching for a telephone. A lot of that fame came from one event in April 1933. That's the Joplin Shootout in Missouri. The gang had been holed up in a rented apartment there, and when the police came knocking, things went bad fast. 2 officers died, the gang fled, and they left behind a camera with undeveloped film inside. Police developed that film, and what they found were photographs that built the legend. Bonnie posing with a pistol on her hip, and another picture, Bonnie was posing with a cigar in her mouth and a shotgun in her hand. Then you had Clyde, he was mugging for the camera. Those photos ended up in every newspaper in the region within days. And here's the funny part about the cigar shot. Bonnie didn't smoke cigars, she smoked Camel cigarettes. The cigar was Clyde's, and the photo was a joke between them, but the press ran with it, and the cigar chomping, gun packing Bonnie became the image that stuck. But here's where it starts to get worse. On June the 10th, 1933, in Wellington, Texas, Clyde's driving and Bonnie's in the passenger seat. They're flying down the road at about 70 miles an hour when Clyde misses a detour sign warning that a bridge up ahead is under construction. The Ford V8 plows through a barricade, goes airborne, and lands in the dry riverbed. The battery cracks open on impact, and boiling hot sulfuric acid pours out and runs down onto Bonnie's right leg. That caused third-degree burns. The burn was so bad that gang members later said they could see bone in some places because her flesh was eaten away. They couldn't take her to the hospital or go find a doctor. They were the most wanted criminals in the area. And walking into an emergency room was the same as walking into a jail cell. So they treated the third-degree acid burns with baking soda. I wonder if they were using baking soda as a deodorant or just had some laying around, but since they had it, they used it, probably because the powder would help dry up and clot the wound. But baking soda doesn't fix a burn that goes to the bone. And there was nowhere clean to put her either. They didn't have a hospital bed or proper bandages that they could change out twice a day. All they had was the backseat of a stolen car. So Bonnie Parker spent months trying to recover from those burns in that back seat, being moved around constantly, bumping down dirt roads, and with no way to keep the wound cleaned and no way to even keep the flies off of it in a Texas summer. Eventually, they got their hands on some laudanum, which was a powerful opiate painkiller you can get with a prescription back then. And a family member got the prescriptions in their own name and passed it along. But the wound itself never really healed. It couldn't because you can't heal a third-degree burn in the back seat of a Ford V8. For the rest of her life, which was only 11 more months, Bonnie walked around with a bad limp. There were times she had to hop to get around, and other times Clyde had to carry her. So now you think about what that car smells like. You got Bonnie in the back seat with an open burn wound on her leg, the kind of wound that's leaking and not healing in a Texas summer day, in a car with no air conditioning because air conditioning in cars wasn't really a thing back then. The cars had a system that was called the flow-through system. Leastways, that's what my dad told me. And what it was is that when you're driving, you open the vents on the car and the air from the outside flows through, hence the flow-through system. Plus, you had 4 or 5 other people in there with her, none of them taking a real bath in who knows how long. You've got the sweat from all of them mixing together, an empty can of cold beans from yesterday's lunch, and probably a chicken bone sitting on the floorboard adding its own thing to the mix. And at night, when they tried to sleep, they had to roll the windows up to keep the mosquitoes and the bugs out. So now, all that body heat and all those smells and all that sweat just sitting in there with them while they try to get some sleep. Yeah, it's not sounding like a real Hollywood movie about now, not in that car. That's what life smelled like after Wellington, and that's what Hollywood doesn't show us. And we don't have to guess at any of this because somebody who was actually in that car has told us. His name was W.D. Jones, and he rode with the Barrow gang for about 8.5 months. He was in the car when Bonnie got burnt. He saw it happen. He lived through everything we've been talking about. Years later, after the 1967 movie came out, W.D. Jones went to a drive-in theater to watch it. There were some teenage boys sitting near him, and they were all excited about the movie. And Jones told them, and this is a quote, The Bonnie and Clyde movie made it all look sort of glamorous. But like I told them teenage boys sitting near me at the drive-in showing, take it from an old man who was there. It was hell. Hell. That's the word he used. Not an adventure, not romantic. The man who actually lived in that car called it hell. And hell is exactly how it ended too. While all this is going on, the driving, the hiding, the wound that wouldn't heal, Texas Ranger Frank Hamer had been tracking them down. Hamer was hired specifically to bring down the Barrow gang, and he was not the kind of man who gave up. What he eventually got was a tip. A gang member named Henry Melvin had been riding with Bonnie and Clyde, and Melvin's father cut a deal. His son freed him for information about where the gang would be. On the morning of May the 23rd, 1934, that information led Hamer and a posse of officers to a rural road outside Gibbsland, Missouri. No, it's not. Gibson, Louisiana is where they went, and it's just checking on you. That's where they set up an ambush when Bonnie Parker and Clyde drove into it. They never had a chance. So when somebody asked what hygiene was like for Bonnie and Clyde, yeah, I'm talking about that kind, the real answer is there wasn't any, not in the way you and I would recognize it today. There wasn't any showers to step into at the end of the day, and there sure wasn't any clean sheets waiting for them at night. There was a creek when they got lucky and a bar of soap when they could steal one, and a back seat full of people who hadn't washed in a week or two or three. And for the last 11 months of Bonnie's life, there was an open wound on her leg that no doctor ever got to look at. Hollywood gave us Faye Dunaway with her hair done, and Warren Beatty in a clean suit. The road and Frank Hamer's ambush outside Gibbsland gave Bonnie and Clyde something a lot different than that. If you got something out of this one, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss the next one, and don't forget to click the hype button too. And drop a comment and let me know which other Hollywood version of a real story you want me to take apart next. I'll see you in the next episode of The Hidden Lens.